Hey guys, imagine yourself shoulder deep in freezing creek water at dawn, chipping away at gravel that smells like rotten eggs, all for the promise of glittering gold flecks that vanish the moment you hold them. Welcome to your new life in 1849, California Gold Rush. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. You set out from home with nothing but wild dreams of instant riches, a beat-up revolver hanging by your side, and a pickaxe that weighs more than your common sense. Your wagon screeches to a halt as you realize that rough terrain is code for your vertebrae are about to file for divorce. No paved roads here, just rickety planks and mud so thick it'll swaddle your boots in sludge. You bump along in what passes for comfort, praying your team of mules hasn't mutual decided to go on strike. Every mile is a contract signed in gritted teeth, spitting flies and soggy biscuits that taste like cardboard seasoned with regret. By the time you stumble into a ramshackle tent city at Sutter's Mill, you're already a shell of your former self. You stand in a queue longer than your list of life regrets, shelling out half your meager savings just for a claim that might, just might, have gold. Your prime spot is next to the outhouse, which doubles as a cocktail lounge for open-air bacteria. But hey, location, 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 right? Daylight drags you out of your lean, sawdust-filled hammock every morning at 4 a.m. You slurp down coffee so weak it couldn't wake a hibernating bear, scarf a biscuit that crunches like dry bone, and trudge to the riverbank. There, you kneel in water colder than your chances back home, shivering as you dip your pan. You swirl gravel and mud in circles so repetitive, you start questioning the very concept of time. Hours pass and your hands turn prune-like, as if auditioning for a bath bomb commercial gone horribly wrong. You lift the pan, hoping for those glittery flecks, but it's all gloom and residue. Your back throbs, your knuckles bleed, and your optimism flatlines. Lunchtime, if you can call it that, brings a soggy mass of salted pork and hardtack biscuits. You bite down and hear the echo of shattered dreams. A seagull dive bombs your lunch like it's a buffet of human misery, snatching a chunk of bread before you can even blink. You curse its ancestors for every wing flap that brought it here. You're in gold country, yet you spend your noon meal nursing a handful of grit and watching birds feast on your desperation. Afternoon is where the phrase claim jumper loses all metaphorical flair. Your neighbor, a hulking brute with a personality as subtle as a guillotine, saunters over, brandishing a parchment that looks suspiciously like your claim. He gives you a toothless grin and says, "Nice spot, friend. Mine now." You're between a rock and a hard place. You can fight him and risk your one revolver shot, or you can yelp like a coward and move 50 yards upstream to try your luck again. Either way, it's a lose-lose that costs more than just dignity. When night falls, there's no glamorous campfire storytelling, only the clatter of pans being washed in a barrel of freezing river water and the distant howls of wolves that consider you a midnight snack. You retreat to your hammock, if you can call a canvas sling hanging between two poles, retreat, and lay awake listening to every creak, snap, and drip. Sleep teases you, but your mind churns with nightmares of golden riches slipping through your fingers, replaced by rust, rot, and regret. 1 week in, and you're already negotiating with your own body. Please stop cramping, please stop bleeding, please stop questioning all my life choices. Your hands are calloused beyond recognition, your face sunburned to leather, and your once bright eyes now dull with sheer exhaustion. You develop an odd talent for swearing at inanimate objects, rocks, pans, even stoic trees that refuse to cough up treasure. Your attempts at improvisation lead to engineering marvels, like the sluice box, a glorified garden gutter promising to channel water and precious metal in a neat assembly line. Spoiler, it's about as efficient as a sieve made of cheese. You rig wooden planks at odd angles, tamper with coffee can siphons, and even experiment with mercury, blissfully unaware that you're crafting your own molecular nightmare. Mercury's silvery shimmer seduces you until it turns your skin mottled and your dreams fuzzy. Congratulations, you've earned a one-way ticket to Mercury madness. Supplies run low fast, flour becomes currency, bacon transforms into gold bars, in both weight and desirability, and coffee shortages spark fistfights that would make a medieval jousting tournament look tame. You trade your last spoon for a chunk of blackberries, which you eat greedily until your insides stage a rebellion. Diarrhea becomes part of the daily routine, ranked alongside blisters, hypothermia, and incessant mosquito symphonies. By the second month, you've got nicknames like Grubby and Sourpuss from fellow prospectors who barely know your actual name. They recognize you by your posture, hunched, defeated, picking at a ratty flannel shirt, and by the rancid stench of river muck that clings to you like a hopeless identity. You're less human now, more a walking monument to historical misery. Occasionally, you strike literal gold, a pan full of shimmering flecks that glint in the sunlight like a cosmic joke. Your heart races, your eyes light up, and you sprint back to camp to weigh your fortune on a precarious set of scales manned by a skeleton-thin clerk. He smirks as he assesses the weight and slips you a coin or two, deducts fees for camp upkeep, water diversion, sunrise tax, and emotional toll. You're lucky if you walk away with enough coin to buy 2 eggs and a slug of whiskey. Then reality hits like a sledgehammer. You realize those 2 eggs will feed you for about half a day, and the whiskey will double as sanitizer when you wash your wounds. Because of course, you've cut yourself on the pickaxe by now. You hoist your weary body back to the river and wonder if anyone else in history has ever been quite this enthusiastic about digging in mud for crumbs of metal. Despite it all, you keep going, driven by a stubborn glimmer of hope, or maybe just masochism. You chart progress in fractions of pennies, celebrate when you scrape out 3 bits of gold, and drown your sorrows in a canteen of questionable water that tastes like wet limestone. Your tongue scours your mouth for moisture, your lungs ache from dust, and you realize that struck it rich is the cruelest joke ever told. As dusk settles, you lace up your boots, if they still fit, and prepare for another day of back-breaking labor. You pause for a moment, stare out at the endless expanse of untamed wilderness, and wonder why anyone in their right mind would choose this over a simple life back home with a roof, a wife, and a decent meal every night. Then again, you're past right mind, your gold fever incarnate, chasing a mirage that keeps moving just beyond your grasp. To be continued. You wake before sunrise again, the sky still pitch black except for pinpricks of cold stars. Your joints crack like aged floorboards as you haul yourself out of that sorry excuse for a hammock. You had hoped last night's fever dream, of golden nuggets raining from the heavens, would leave you with renewed vigor. Instead, you stagger to your feet feeling like you were run over by your own mule. You swallow grit from yesterday's meal and realize there's no turning back. Your stomach grumbles in protest. Apparently, it didn't read the memo about the great fortune you're allegedly hunting. By the time you reach the creek, steam rises from the biting water like ghostly wraiths mocking your ambition. You pull on your leather gloves, caked in mud, holes at the fingertips, and grip your pan. The morning chill bites through your cracked knuckles, but you've learned to ignore pain long ago. You begin the same ritual. Scoop gravel, swirl water, strain for specks of fool's gold or the real thing. 2 hours later, you peer into the pan with a magnifying glass squint and see nothing but dull rock fragments. You mutter sweet nothings to yourself. Maybe tomorrow feels like the world's worst motivational poster. Around 8 a.m., sound of hoofbeats turns your head. A group of new arrivals charge into the camp like locusts descending on promised Eden. They heft axes glimmering with fresh steel, faces rosy from hope and brand new wool coats. They haven't yet discovered the smell of rotting bacon or that their shoes will disintegrate in the mud. Your lopsided grin is 1 part pity, 3 parts amused superiority. You whisper to your pen, enjoy your first claim. They'll have you crowded out by sundown. As if summoned, 2 squat men in dusty frock coats approach with a shuffling gait. They wave official-looking papers and demand to inspect your claim's boundaries. You explain, through clipped breath, that you, of all persons, have priority. They unfurl parchment, point at seals you've never heard of, and pronounce you trespassing. The sheriff, a gaunt man armed with more bureaucracy than bullets, sides with them because their paperwork seems fancier. You shrug, pack up your gear, and wander 50 yards upstream, cursing earnest pioneers and their unreadable scribbles. Mid-morning brings the familiar ache of hunger. You dig through your pack, a tangle of empty coffee sacks and half-eaten jerky, and find a lonely biscuit. You dunk it in water, hoping it'll soften, but time and entropy have turned it into a petrified relic. You crunch it anyway, wince, and remind yourself, calories are calories. Nearby, a handful of prospectors gather around a makeshift blacksmith's forge. One chap, Old Iron Mike, hammers a horseshoe while regaling the crowd with tales of striking a motherlode. His stretchable anecdotes leave you doubting the laws of physics. I hauled out 18 pounds in a single pan, he boasts. You peer at his rigged sluice box, constructed from discarded board planks and bound by rusted nails, and realize it would take Merlin's magic to extract that much gold. He winks when he sees your look of skepticism. Don't question the pros, son, he says. You swallow your sarcasm and move on. By noon, the sun slants down through a haze of smoke from cooking fires. You attempt to boil water for coffee in a dented pot. You and 5 other prospectors share one flame, creating a queue longer than the morning's county magistrate docket. When you finally sip the scalding concoction, you feel half awake and wholly betrayed. You nibble on a strip of salted pork so rancid it tastes like a combination of old socks and regret. A flea, riveted by the aromatic delight, leaps into your coffee cup. You fish it out with trembling fingers and swear you'll charge that flea rent for the rest of its life. Afternoon light offers no respite. You trudge back to your battered sluice, shovel earth into its sluiceway, and again wait for flakes of hope to appear. Instead, your sluice clogs. You kneel, fingers numb, tearing it apart to clear logs of pebbles. In the din of hammering water against wood, your body shrieks in protest. Your back seizes up in a cramp so vicious it feels like a steel vice. You grunt, abandon the sluice to its clogged fate, and slump against a rock. There, you stare at a ragged scar running down your forearm, gift from a previous day's careless swish of pickaxe. It throbs, swollen and angry. You consider using whiskey to disinfect it, but those few precious drops belong to tomorrow's sunrise toast, if any sunrise brings toast. A sudden commotion pulls you from self-pity. A shout rings out near the river bend. A prospector has tumbled in, arms flailing like a fish out of water. The other men leap to the bank but watch in slack-jawed horror as he lands face first, grip on pickaxe lost in the current, and begins drifting downstream. You dash to the edge, flailing glove-laden arms like an uncoordinated sea creature. You bark at the men to throw a rope. Someone tosses burlap torn from a sack, but it lands yards short. Feet sliding on mossy stones, you lunge forward, nearly plunging into the water yourself. At the last second, the man's hat, bobbling like a sad yellow buoy, snags on a protruding branch. A fellow prospector hauls him in, water cascading in rivulets from his hat brim. He drenches the rescuers and coughs up creek water with the rhythm of an old pump. Instead of grateful thanks, he snarls, "Watch it next time," and stomps to his claim. You stand dripping survival adrenaline and resent humanity all at once. You return to camp at dusk, exhausted, caked in sludge, and still empty-handed. Dinner consists of boiled beans so mushy they resemble something you try not to think about. A thin stew simmers over embers, offering the vaguest hint of nourishment. You ladle it into a tin bowl and sit atop a wooden crate. Across from you, a group of prospectors trade gold bits for food. One fellow offers a single nugget, small as a chickpea, for half a bowl of stew. The grocer pocketing that nugget sports a neatly trimmed beard and a clean apron, as though he's hosting tea at Kensington Palace, not swapping sustenance for the life's work of a beaten-down digger. You entertain the fantasy of tackling him to the ground, confiscating his apron, and insulting his mother, before remembering that you'd probably lose and still be hungry. Nightfall brings a chorus of insects so loud it sounds like the world is rallying to drown out your sorrows. Your eyelashes stick together from the smoke and sweat. You trudge back to your hammock, pause for a moment to gaze at the glittering night sky, and swear you can almost hear the gold calling your name, only to realize it's just the wind rattling a tin lantern. You blow it out and plop into your hammock. Sleep is a fickle companion. One moment you're drifting, the next you're jolted awake by the crack of gunfire. Someone's probably shooting at claim jumpers, or maybe just into the air to attract attention, both equally plausible in this chaotic land. Day 3. 165. Yes, you've kept track in the tattered notebook you still refuse to lose. You pry yourself awake at 3:45 a.m., a full year of chasing fool's gold and blistering disappointment. Your hands bear calluses that would rival any blacksmith's, and your feet are permanently fused to the interior shape of your boots. You can hear your ribcage clicking each time you draw breath. Of course, you'd hope to strike it rich within weeks, but history laughs at fools and rewards no one with mercy. Yet here you are, on the brink of absolute madness. You trudge to the creek one last time, dip your pan, and this time glance down at a bright fleck so large it almost glows. You freeze, heart hammering like a jackhammer in a tin can factory. You seize the pan with shaking hands, milk that creek water like your life depends on it, because it does. You lift the pan. There, nestled among the stones, is a single, perfect nugget, about the size of a ham sandwich crust. Your breath catches. You stare as though expecting it to vanish in a puff of dust. You pocket it, secured safely in an oilskin sack that's cost you a month's rations, and stagger back to camp. The world seems different in that moment. The smoky haze of disappointment clears, replaced by a golden halo around your redemption. You fish out your tattered notebook, scribble today's date, and write one word in capital letters: victory. You hear cheers erupt from the trading post as word of your find spreads like wildfire. Other prospectors congregate, eager for a peek, for a sample, for an ounce of your luck. The grocer with the Kensington apron sidles up. He's got a scale, polished brass and ready. Each of his scales carries an invisible fee: service charge, handling, sunlight fee, merchant sorrow tax. After 20 minutes of weighing, paperwork, and solemn bargain, he hands you a small pouch of coins. You tip it to hear the clink, music to your mud-filled ears. It's enough to buy a proper meal, a fresh pair of boots, and maybe even a new hat that doesn't smell of creek water. Suddenly, you're the envy of the camp. Strangers pat your back. The local newspaper reporter, perched on a barrel, scribbles down every detail for tomorrow's issue. Lucky prospector finds big nugget near Sutter's Creek. You flash your crooked grin, bask in the warmth of attention, and for a glorious moment, all the blisters, skewed claims, and ratty biscuits fade into the background. But as the sun dips behind the Sierra Nevada, casting long shadows over your claim, you can't help but wonder, was it worth it? A single nugget after a year of misery. You count the coins in your sack and realize you're still only marginally better off than your initial dreams promised. You weigh the hardship, the broken tools, the stolen claims, the nights spent shivering, and wonder if this is truly the American dream or just a cruel mirage. The fire crackles. Prospectors whirl tales of your great find into legend, but you know the truth. You're still knee-deep in that same creek, subject to nature's whims, claim jumpers, and peddlers of false hope. You lift your coin pouch, turning it over in your calloused hands, precious metal in a different shape, and smile wryly. Tomorrow you'll head back to that creek, spade in hand, because the fever still burns. You came for gold, but you stay for something more twisted, the promise that maybe, just maybe, the next pan will yield enough to rewrite your story. And so, as the embers glow, the dying embers of your resolve, you dare to dream again. But next time, you vow, in that shaky half-whisper between hope and insanity, you'll dig smarter, fight claim jumpers harder, and maybe pack extra biscuits. Because this is the gold rush, darling, the cruelest punchline history ever wrote. And you, dear prospector, are its most enthusiastic punchline. You drag yourself from sleep's reluctant embrace just as dawn's first pale fingers pry apart the night. Your bones protest in every creak and groan, but hope, ever the cruel taskmaster, drives you onward. Today marks day 462 of your lavish adventure in golden misery. You shoulder your pickaxe like a battle-scarred veteran, though the only war you've waged is against your own sanity and a riverbed that couldn't care less. There's a half-empty canteen sloshing lukewarm regret at your hip, and your boots are slick with the ever-present sheen of creek sludge. The morning air tastes of frost and desperation. The other prospectors have named you Eeyore, and you've come to accept it as a term of endearment, because nothing says friendship like comparing you to a perpetually gloomy donkey. You stomp through camp, pan in hand, past tents festooned with tattered flags proclaiming fortune awaits and riches beyond your wildest dreams, as if the words hadn't lost all meaning 3 winters ago. Ember smoke still drifts from last night's fires, carrying the scent of burnt beans and broken spirits. At the creek, your usual spot is already occupied by a fresh arrival, a sprightly young fellow with optimism so thick it drips off him like honey. He's humming a jaunty tune, brand new pan gleaming. You offer a curt nod and shove him upstream. Go find your own misery. He smiles anyway, undeterred, setting up 12 feet from your claim. You choke on a bitter laugh. It's not your fault the creek's only got so many gallons of water to share. You settle into your familiar routine. Scoop, swirl, strain. Gravel grinds between your teeth when you taste eternal failure, and the mud clings to your clothes like a second skin. You peer into the pan, hope flares, only to find a dusting of pyrite masquerading as the real thing. You swat the fool's gold away, like dismissing a sham suitor at the door. You whisper, "Not today, sunshine." 9:35 a.m. Supply wagon. The sight should thrill you. Fresh flour, salted pork, coffee sacks full of false promises. Instead, it's a rolling reminder that every biscuit is a down payment on another day of toil. You sidle up to the trader, Madame Grit, a widow who's turned profiteering into an art form. She eyes your meager handful of gold dust and quotes a price that would make your boots cry. You cough up your hoarded 2 bits and stagger off, clutching a pale sack of flour so meager it could feed a mouse for a week. Lunchtime. A communal stew boiled in a cauldron so large, you wonder if it's housing a small village of aquatic critters. You ladle a lukewarm serving into your tin bowl and sit on a stump to eat. The stew sloshes between your knees as you chew. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoes. Likely 2 new arrivals celebrating the discovery of an actual flake. You swallow your envy and think, I'll trade that flake for a day's worth of sleep. Afternoon brings a surprise, dynamite. The booming innovation of modern mining, promising to blast rock and reveal mother lode beneath. You volunteer, because why not, and are handed a stick of the stuff with a frayed fuse. Your heart thumps. "Back up 20 paces," someone yells. You take 17. The fuse sputters like a dying worm. You bite your lip, jump, and the explosion rattles your bones. A plume of dust and rock showers down. You cough, eyes streaming grit. The crater reveals only more gray rock. You mutter, "Next time, maybe fireworks." Later, a commotion at the trading post. A posse riding in, led by Sheriff No Bullet McGraw, the lawman whose reputation for paperwork outpaces his pistol wielding. They're after a gang of highway robbers preying on prospectors leaving camp at dusk. You tuck your valuables, what little you have, under your shirt and watch as the posse splinters into a dozen directions. You envy their chase. At least it's action, not 400 days of sifting flute-sized rocks. Evening. You hobble into town proper, a cluster of false hopes vibrating with the clang of hammers, building new saloons and dance halls. You stop at Murphy's Cantina, needing liquid courage. The barkeep slides you a shot of firewater so potent it tastes like distilled regret. You down it in one go, throat ablaze. A girl in a faded dress gives you a sad, sympathetic smile. Perhaps she recognizes the 1,000-mile stare of a man who's forgotten why he came here. She leans in. "You find anything today?" You shrug, ordering a second shot. "Just another day." She laughs, a brittle sound. "Well, champ, maybe tomorrow." You attempt a smile, swallow your whiskey. Into the world you might as well be an empty flask. Night crawls in, and you trudge back to the creek for one last pan before bed. Because gold fever demands devotion at all hours. Under a sky dripping stars, you swirl gravel in the waning moonlight. Then, like lightning in a desert sky, you glimpse it, a tiny glimmer so faint you wonder if your eyes deceive you. You hold the pan still, heart thundering, and trace the edge of a minuscule fleck. It's smaller than a mustard seed, but after 462 days, it shines like a supernova. You pocket it, heart hammering. One fleck won't buy you land in San Francisco, but it's enough to keep the fever alive. You crawl into your tent, if a patchwork of canvas and hope can be called that, and clutch the fleck like a talisman. Sleep is frail tonight, your dreams crowded with visions of gold veins cascading through mountains. You wake before dawn once more, but today is different. Today you feel the stirrings of possibility. You stride to the sluice with purposeful determination. No more half-hearted scooping, no more grumbling. You work with a focused fury, shoveling earth like a man possessed. Fellow prospectors glance your way, eyebrows raised at your sudden zeal. Their tent flap gossip follows you. Why's Grubby going at it like a jackhammer? You don't answer, you're busy. By mid-morning, your sluice box has collected a surprising amount of heavier pebbles. You scrape them into your pan and swirl. The water churns, and this time you see it, a handful of tiny golden dots clustered together. You gasp, more shocked than elated. A cluster! You lift your pan and hold it aloft like a triumphant war banner. The creek echoes with the whispers of your name. There he is, the madman who struck gold again. And for once, you don't mind being mad. You stagger back to camp with your prize, every step a victory lap. The trading post clerk, Madame Grit, welcomes you with a calculating grin. She weighs your bounty, deducts her tolls, camp fee, sluice fee, wind gust tax, emotional distress levy, and offers you a pouch of coins that feels almost substantial. You count it thrice, fearing arithmetic's betrayal, but it's real. Real enough for 3 days' worth of bacon, a fresh bale of coffee beans, and a new pair of socks that won't dissolve in the creek. Flush with fleeting success, you head to the saloon. The piano's tinkling, cow pies get kicked around outside, and the air is thick with pipe smoke. You buy a round for every patron, raising a toast to the foolish, the stubborn, and the downright insane, for without us, history would be far too polite. They cheer, wallets open, and for one night, you are not Eeyore. You are King Prospector, sovereign of broken picks and fever dreams. But dawn arrives, as it always does, with the smell of damp earth and fresh uncertainty. You awake in a puddle of last night's spilled whiskey, coins clinking in your pocket like cruel laughter. You lace up your boots, resolve hardening in your chest. There is no ending yet to your tale, only the next day's creek, the next pan, the next promise of glimmering fortune. So you march back to that stubborn river, where hope and misery mingle in cold currents. You set down your gear, lift your pan, and whisper the golden prayer, "Show me more." And the creek, ever impartial, offers up its answer, one swirl at a time. You haul yourself to your feet at dawn's first light, the weight of every blister a personal greeting card signed from California Creek. This is day 478, which is exactly 477 days, and many nights, more than you ever planned to endure. Your trousers are a patchwork of stains, your shirt smells of creek sludge and desperation, and your boots squeak like dying rodents. Yet here you stand, pan in hand, heart hammering with the same brutal hope that started this misadventure. The creek, ever faithful, gurgles at your feet like an indifferent confidant. You kneel and begin the now ritualistic scoop, swirl, strain routine that has defined your life. Gravel tumbles through your fingers, each pebble a silent witness to your folly. You pause, mid-swirl, as sunlight catches something in the pan, a tiny glimmer so faint you almost dismiss it as a trick of shadow. But no, there it is, stubbornly golden. Your breath quickens, and you lift the pan, water sloshing over its rim. A cluster of flecks, shimmering like broken promises redeemed. You pocket this morning's meager victory and stagger back to camp, staggering like a punk rocker whose guitar cable just snapped mid-riff. Prospectors glance your way, curiosity flaring in their eyes. You ignore their silent applause. You've learned that sharing news of gold is like handing out free diseases. Instead, you slip into your tent, pull your battered skillet from the embers of last night's fire, and boil water for the weakest coffee imaginable. You swirl in grounds that taste like scorched dreams, gulp it down, and steel yourself for the day's inevitable indignities. By mid-morning, you find yourself negotiating with Madame Grit once more. She eyes your flex with the practiced leer of a carnival barker sizing up a mark. "These will fetch you a pretty penny," she purrs, weighing them with her brass scales. "But don't forget the usual fees." You hand over your bounty and a slice of your spirit, receiving in exchange a handful of coins that click like hollow promises. Enough, if spent wisely, to buy fresh socks, a warm meal, and perhaps a fleeting sense of accomplishment. Pocket jingling, you wander to the supply tents. A new gadget catches your eye, a mechanized rocker box, promising twice the yield with half the misery. It's a contraption of wood and rope, looking suspiciously like a children's playground slide crossed with a torture rack. The tent's proprietor, a slick entrepreneur with teeth as white as his lies, extols its virtues. "You'll need only feed it gravel and water," he boasts, "and it'll do the rest." You blink. You buy the thing on credit. Madame Grit is now your overlord on two fronts, and haul it to your claim, praying it's not another leaky promise. As you assemble the rocker box, nearby prospectors gather for free entertainment, a live demonstration of how the contraption works. You dump gravel into the hopper, pour water, and kick the rocker. It creaks, it groans, it whines like a barn cat. A small spray of glittery flecks tumbles into the receiving pan, 2 whole grains of gold. You taste triumph, but it's over almost before it begins. The box clogs. You spend the next hour disassembling, reassembling, and muttering regrets. By the end, you're covered in sweat, sawdust, and market vendor deceit. Lunchtime ambushes you with the same stale bread and mystery meat you've come to adore, or endure. You shovel food into your mouth with the efficiency of a machine designed for necessity rather than pleasure. A group of laughing newcomers wander by, celebrating their first panholds, half a speck each. Their exuberance feels like mockery, so you glare at them until they sidle away, guilt-ridden. Or maybe that's just indigestion. They didn't see you clutching 2 flecks this morning. Afternoon drags you toward the river's edge, where claim jumpers lurk like vultures circling carrion. Today's interloper, a lanky youth with a devil-may-care grin, strides onto your plot and drops his pan next to yours. "Mind if I share?" he asks, voice syrupy. You narrow your eyes. "I do mind," you reply, voice low. He shrugs, leans on his pickaxe, and says, "No worries, I'll be over there," pointing 2 feet away. You grit your teeth and grunt assent. He unpacks cheerful gear and sets to work. His optimism is infectious, but you squelch it. You've got a reputation to maintain, that of the grizzled veteran who scares off fools. As the sun dips toward the Sierra spine, you decide to try one last gambit, a new claim downstream, where rumors swirl of richer gravel. You pack your gear, lift it onto your back, and trudge through brush that rakes at your clothes. The creek widens, water running cooler, the gravel coarser. You drop your box beside the bank and get to work. The first pan is grit and rubble, the second, the third, more of the same. But on the fourth, you glimpse something, a solid chunk, amber yellow and unswerving in its fineness. You freeze, heart galloping. You lift the pan and hold that chunk aloft, golden arc against the dying light. You pocket the nugget as dusk turns the sky lavender. You slosh back to camp where prospectors gather round the campfire. Embers drift upward like fleeting hopes. You approach, and the fire's glow illuminates their eager faces. You produce the nugget, sizable enough to feed envy for a month, and place it on a flat rock. All conversation halts. The nugget gleams in the firelight, a polished testament to your stubborn faith in insanity. Madame Grit appears, eyes narrowing like twin sluice boxes. She negotiates again, fees, taxes, levies, emotional distress surcharges, until you're left with a pouch of coins that bulges with possibility. You pat it, smile wryly, and pocket it. Enough, with careful budgeting, for a proper meal and something you haven't afforded in a year. Clean clothes. You approach the laundry tent, a lean-to manned by a wiry old woman with a penchant for gossip. Hand over coins, and watch your rags disappear. You'll reclaim them tomorrow, fresh and clean as newborn dreams. That night, you treat yourself to a bowl of stew so thick it clings to your ribs like armor. You slurp quietly beneath the awning of stars, savoring every spoonful as though it were ambrosia. Prospectors raise mugs of questionable ale, toasting your find. You join in, the ale burning in your throat, sending ribbons of warmth through your chest. You feel, dare you say it, content. But sleep is ever elusive. You lie in your hammock, coins ringing softly in your pocket, and wonder what you'll do with this fortune. Will you head to San Francisco's glittering streets, invest in a saloon? Or will you return home, tail between your legs, admitting that the myth of gold was never worth the price paid in sweat and tears? The answer drifts in and out like the creek's current. Morning naturally arrives too soon. You hop out of bed, dust off ambition, and head to the creek. You've almost forgotten how it feels to dig without the numbing weight of false hope. You drop your pan, scoop gravel, and swirl. But today, instead of gazing for flecks, you watch the water flow around the stones. You listen to its steady murmur, strangely comforting after months of roaring silence in your head. You lift your pan one final time, empty, and smile. No gold today, but the creek has given you something more. Clarity. You pack your gear, tipped with gratitude rather than dread. You stroll back to camp, stopping at Madame Grit's tent. She eyes you curiously as you lay your pan on her counter. "No sale today," you say, surprisingly calm. Her brow furrows. You slide the pan back to yourself. Money jingles in her apron pocket, but you don't care. You lift your chin, heft your pack, and set off toward the open trail leading east, toward home, toward a life where golden dreams are no longer worth the misery they inflict. Behind you, camp life carries on. Prospectors jabber, sluice boxes clatter, and the creek keeps its secrets. But you walk on, boots crunching dry earth instead of muddy regret. You've survived the gold rush's cruel joke. You've tasted its glitter and paid its toll. Now, you choose freedom over fever, the promise of tomorrow unburdened by the weight of everywhere else. As you crest the ridge, you look back at the twisting creek, glinting like silver ribbon in the morning sun. You tip your hat, a gesture of farewell and respect, to the river that broke you and built you anew. Then, you turn east and march toward home, where warmth, laughter, and honest work await. And though the fever may flicker in your blood forever, you carry one golden truth. Some treasures aren't found in mud and rock, but in the choice to let go. Imagine waking up in absolute darkness, the stench of salt-soaked grime clinging to your lungs, rats scuttling over your limbs like tiny, gleeful executioners, and realizing you've just become Port Royal's latest guest. No gentle welcome committee, no bedside water, just iron bars, dripping ceilings, and a tide of misery rising each day. Sound fun? Thought not. Today, we plunge into the hellish underworld of 17th century Port Royal's dungeons, where welcome meant your spine cracking on a straw pallet, and your only neighbors were disease, despair, and the ever-looming threat of being thrown to the sharks. Above, let's get into why you absolutely, positively would not want to be a prisoner in Port Royal's dungeons. You awake to a damp slap of seawater against cold stone floors. Your head pounds with a hangover you never earned, and every breath tastes like rotting fish mixed with spilled ale. Port Royal, the richest and wickedest city in the New World, was famed for its pirates, pleasure houses, and palm-fringed taverns. But below a crooked red lantern at the water's edge lurks something far darker, a labyrinth of dank cells. Limestone, known simply as the dungeons. These rooms weren't built for comfort, but for cruelty. No windows offered fresh air, only tiny slits high above, too narrow to let in sunbeams or hope. The ceiling dripped brackish water onto your shoulders, staining your shirt and whispers of moss forming slick footprints at your feet. The floor was stone cold, with straw so thin it might as well have been a rumor. At night, every creak of timber above, footsteps of guards making their rounds, felt like a guillotine's blade descending on your already doomed neck. By mid-morning, you discover that the rats here have no fear of man. They're fat from feasting on spilled gruel, and from your soft, trembling flesh when you're unconscious. They gnaw at leather straps on your wrists, scuttling away only when you swing a fist, but more often, they swarm, a wall of whiskers and tiny teeth. Their squeaks echo in your skull, turning each breath into a chorus of horror. Hunger sets in quickly. Your first meal, a half-rotten biscuit so hard it could shatter a jaw, dipped in foul water scraped from a communal barrel. You clutch it as if it were gold, only to find worms squirming inside. You swallow anyway, because starvation in Port Royal's jail meant being trampled by other prisoners desperate enough to fight you for the scraps. Meals are served once a day if the jailer deigns to show, and sometimes replaced with a kick in the ribs for asking too politely. Midday introduces new torments, the rising tide of disease. Port Royal was called the wickedest city for a reason. Sex, rum, and filth mingled in every alley. You catch a fever within days. The egg makes your bones ache as if a blacksmith's hammer were forging coal in your marrow. The shivers rack your body so violently that your straw pallet becomes a makeshift cradle of suffering. There is no medical cares here, only the pitiful wail of fellow sufferers and the distant clang of the prison door slamming shut behind the next batch of captives. By afternoon, your wrists burn from iron shackles. Each time you shift position, the links bite into flesh, carving grooves that bleed. Guards use the chains as levers to pull you to your feet, dragging you to the small exercise yard, a slate of open sky barely big enough for a man to turn around. There, you're forced to march in circles while jeering townsfolk toss rotten fruit over the wall like insecticide. You lurch, one foot in the yard, one in the dark cell beyond, trapped between shame and stench. Evening brings darker rituals. Occasionally, a prisoner is chosen for questioning. hauled upstairs into the governor's chamber, where threats of torture are wielded like blunt clubs. The tools, thumb screws, the iron boot, the tortured ducking stool, are displayed on a polished table, as if for sale at a butcher's market. You hear screams echo down the stone corridor, blending fear and salt spray into a melody of madness. You survive each day by clinging to tiny scraps of humanity, a whispered prayer, a shared crust of bread from a sympathetic fellow prisoner, or the memory of sunlight on your own skin. But each small victory is met by a fresh nightmare. Rats crawling over your feet at night, the chilling drip of water on your face, the echo of manacles locking you into a living tomb. And that, my friends, is just part 1. Next time, we'll explore the cruel hierarchies among prisoners, the infamous jailer known as Bloody Sir Thomas, and how a single drop of seawater could mean the difference between life and a shark's appetizer. Stay tuned. You wake to the distant clang of the jail bell. Though wake is generous, your senses are already numb. Yet something about today feels different. Perhaps it's the rumor circulating through the damp cell block. Tonight, the governor himself will preside over a special inspection of the dungeons. That means lights, torches lit in corridors normally submerged in perpetual gloom, and the rarest of privileges, a glimpse of daylight in the courtyard, if only through iron-grated windows. Of course, privilege still means you're shackled, paraded like livestock, but a change of scenery is a change of scenery. The morning feeding arrives late, as usual. The jailer, a gaunt fellow named Briggs, known for his patented glare that could curdle milk, slides a bucket against the bars. Inside is a watery gruel that quivers like a jellyfish and smells like a coffin left to rot. You dip your tin cup and sip. It burns going down, but at least it's warm. Briggs stands back, arms crossed like he's considering whether you've earned this small mercy. You don't dare look up. Hunger is a humbling master. By mid-morning, you catch murmurs from your cellmates about the inspection preparations. Chains rattle as they whisper. Bloody Sir Thomas has cleared the trash from the corridors. One hisses. No rats on display for the governor's benefit. You realize the rats have retreated deeper into the walls. No more nightly feasts at your expense. For once, you're almost grateful for the governor's vanity. The governor, Sir Henry Morgan, privateer turned administrator, is as flamboyant as a peacock in mismatched plumes. He'll stride through the dungeon with silk sleeves trailing and a jeweled cane tapping, expecting subjects to bow. Your pain-stiffened shoulders might comply inadvertently, so ingrained is the posture of subjugation. You steel yourself to appear suitably penitent, though penitence tastes like ashes in your mouth. Around noon, you're herded out of your cell in single file, shackled together by the ankles. Guards escort you up the narrow stairway, each step echoing with the weight of 100 broken spirits. At the top, torches blaze, casting flickering shadows on damp stone walls. You blink as daylight floods a small courtyard ringed by high walls. It's no Versailles, but the sliver of sky is enough to make your heart ache with longing. Sir Henry arrives on the governor's dais, a raised platform of planks and barrels. He's flanked by a handful of gilded clerks, quills at the ready. The first prisoner, a grizzled mariner accused of smuggling, kneels and recites his crime in halting tones. Sir Henry's eyes narrow. A clerk records every word on parchment. When the man stumbles, the governor taps him with his jeweled cane. The mariner flinches, spine crushing under the weight of expectation. You shift your weight, trying not to wince at the spectacle. Your turn comes, you step forward, ankles chained, heart pounding. You clear your throat. Your Excellency, I am... A sudden gust of tropical wind scatters papers. The clerks scramble, pencils scratching frantically. The governor's silk cuffs flutter like startled birds. In the commotion, you seize your moment. Your Excellency, I beg your mercy. I confess to trespass and theft of rum, but I swear I meant only to feed my starving family. His jeweled cane interrupts. Spare me your sob story. He flicks a paper back to the clerk. Mark him for another week in the lower cells, and double his rations of labor, not gruel. He chuckles a cascade of manicured teeth. The clerks giggle behind their quills. You bow as best you can, your head nearly scraping the low ceiling, and shuffle back down the stairs, each step heavier than the last. Back in your cell, you find Madame Delgado, a once prominent planter's wife turned common felon, pressed against the damp wall. Her eyes are wild. "They called it an inspection," she spits, "but the governor only wanted entertainment. He had us cavort for him like dancing bears. He laughed at our sores, our hunger. I swear I saw blood on his silk sleeve." You swallow bile. Entertainment. In Port Royal, cruelty is sport. Afternoon brings the next horror, a mad experiment in humiliation. The jailer lines up all prisoners in the yard and hands out wooden buckets. "See cleanse," he announces. "Dip and scrub." You stare at your bucket. It's water. Cold, briny water drawn straight from the harbor, carrying salt and oil and bits of algae. The guards beat drums, tickling the nerves of every captive. You cringe as they shout, "Wash yourselves, sinners." You dip your bruised palms, lather up whatever soap you can't name, maybe soap at all, and scrub until your skin pinkens. The rats watch from the shadows, waiting for the scraps of filth you wash away. Once clean, you must parade past the governor's viewing gallery. Sir Henry reclines on a chaise, an odd bit of home decoration he's requisitioned from a wealthy merchant, smoking a clay pipe. He beckons you forward, inspecting each scrubbed face. You see pity in the eyes of some clerks, but the governor's gaze is hard. You shuffle past, ears burning, skin crawling under the sun's glare. When you reach the arcade, a clerk jots down notes. Who looks weak? Who fakes strength? Who's fit for chains beyond these dungeons? Evening finds you back in your cell. You sit on the thin straw mat, ribs pressing painfully through your shirt. A single candle, left behind by the inspector's departure, flickers on a ledge. Its flame is tenuous, battling a breeze that sneaks through cracks. You listen to the distant crash of waves. Free movement, unfettered life, a cruel reminder of the chains that bind you here. Night brings your worst companion, dreams of escape. You half see yourself scaling rotten stairs, crossing the courtyard, vaulting the wall, and sprinting down the sandy beach toward blazing freedom. Then you awake, tangled in empty blankets, face pressed into damp straw. A rat scurries past, and you realize you've been clutching its body. The dream's sweetness curdles into shame. Weeks pass in this rhythm of torment. Morning's meager gruel, midday's parade, afternoon's humiliations, and night's fevered illusions. You endure beatings for the slightest offense, stomping the wrong foot, speaking out of turn, not marching in perfect step. Your ankles bear the brand of the iron cuffs, chafed, mottled, infected. You've become a gallery of wounds, each one a brushstroke in the governor's cruel masterpiece. Yet amid the horror, small rebellions flicker. A whispered poem recited at midnight, a secret bandage passed between cells, the solidarity of prisoners huddled in corners, sharing what little warmth remains. You learn names: O'Malley the deserter, who sings sea shanties in guttering candlelight; Isabella the runaway slave, whose laughter still rings like bells; Father Emmanuel, the broken priest, blessing every morsel of gruel before it touches lips. One morning, fate intervenes. A merchant ship's captain arrives with a letter from London, a royal pardon for select prisoners. Among the names scrawled in elegant script is yours. They call for volunteers to work off debts aboard the crowned ship, or face the dungeons indefinitely. You sign, hands shaking. The alchemy of hope transforms your blood to fire. You pack yourself into a row of trembling believers, each of you clinging to the promise of fresh air beyond these walls. At dusk, you're led through the governor's courtyard one last time. Sir Henry stands at the gate, cane in hand, eyes bright with interest. He studies you like you're a specimen. You bow, this time with more curiosity than contrition. He nods curtly and gestures toward the ship's gangplank. "Go," he says. "Your sins are washed away by service to the crown." You step onto the plank, sandals slapping wood, heart pounding as though it's never beaten before. Behind you, the clink of chains falls silent. The breeze off the bay carries the scent of salt, freedom, and infinite possibility. You inhale deeply, dangerous, glorious air, and never look back. Tonight, you taste rum aboard a ship, under skies untouched by stone walls. You share laughs and food and songs with fellow pardoned souls. The hunger persists, as does the fear, but both are tempered by choice. You row, you scrub decks, you dream of the shore that awaits when your service is done. And though the dungeons of Port Royal linger in your bones, etched into every scar, you carry something stronger. The knowledge that even the darkest cell can't imprison the human spirit forever. You awaken before dawn to the distant sound of waves breaking against the harbor wall. A cruel reminder that the world outside still lives, breathes, and enjoys fresh air. Below you, in the lower dungeon tiers, the moans of feverish prisoners drift upward like sorrowful sea shanties. Today marks your third descent into Port Royal's abyssal bowels. No inspection, no parade, just a steady drip of torture by monotony. You shuffle to the iron-barred gate, where Vance the turnkey, towering, sour-faced, and impervious to bribes, slides a rusted key into the lock. The door groans open, revealing a corridor slick with slime and littered with broken boards. "Move!" he snarls, prodding you forward with the blunt end of his staff. You stumble into the common chamber, a cavernous room lit by a single sputtering torch. Here, prisoners from all walks of unfortunateness mingle. Debtors in tatters, pirates freshly caught with stolen rum, runaway slaves recaptured by bounty hunters, and mutineers bound for worse fate than the gallows. They eye you warily, each sizing you up as potential ally or rival for what little space and scraps remain. By mid-morning, hunger hits like a wave crashing against coral. You join the line for the daily ration, a bowl of watery gruel so thin it barely wets your tongue. As you inch forward, a hulking man shoves you aside for placing your bowl too close to his. You retreat, dignity in tatters. When your turn comes, you scoop the gruel in greedy gulps, ignoring the floating bits of unidentifiable muck. Around you, low whispers drift of rats swimming through the slurry, an all-you-can-eat buffet for vermin. You swallow hard, knowing that starvation lurks a step behind any meal missed. The dungeon's hierarchy reveals itself through these small skirmishes. At your table sits Marilla, a former tavern wench with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She commands respect by warding off bullies and rationing her meager portion to share with the sickest inmates. You catch her handing a scrap of breather's bread to an elderly debtor whose ration was reallocated to a stronger fellow. You nod in thanks. In Port Royal's dungeons, solidarity is a rare spice in a stew of cruelty. After mealtime, you and a handful of able-bodied prisoners are herded into the chain gang. Shackled ankle to ankle, you march single file through the warren of corridors until you reach the garden, a narrow strip of land behind the governor's mansion where ornamental palms once stood. Now it's a weedy paddock where you tug at roots and shovel soil, while overseers whip the ground for progress. The sun beats down mercilessly, baking the courtyard into an oven. Sweat pours from your pores, mixing with the grime and rivers that carve canyons along your back. If you lag, the lash finds your shoulder. If you speak, the lash finds your tongue. By afternoon, your bones ache with the memory of chains and flogging. You slump against the wall of the governor's stone terrace, where passers-by peer over railings to gawk at the forced labor. They toss copper coins, insultingly small, in hopes of amusing themselves with prisoners scrambling for shiny distractions. You ignore the coins, your hands are too blistered to bend for a copper piece. Instead, you stand and press your palm to the cool stone, drawing a moment's reprieve from the sun's cruel glare. Returning to the inner dungeon, you find the rats have reclaimed their territory. 4 small ones dash across the floor, squealing at your intrusion. You stoop and chase them futilely with a broken twig, imagining the luxury of training them as pets rather than plague carriers. A guard laughs and shoves you. Don't get too attached, scum. Evening brings the medical visit, a charade meant to quash disease before it spills into the city. A crude doctor, more butcher than physician, arrives with a leather bag full of liches, lancets, and boozy spirits. He pokes and prods, declaring you too weak for surgery but too dangerous to release. He leaves behind a bittersweet tincture that stings like molten iron chased by salt water. You sip it dutifully, suppressing the urge to spit. Night in the dungeon is darkest not for lack of candles, but for the flood of nightmares. You drift into uneasy sleep on your straw pallet, only to jolt awake at the crack of bone against stone as the overseer tests whether you're still breathing. Between coughs, you whisper to your cellmate, a pirate named Hawkins, about life beyond these walls. He tells tales of distant isles, buried treasure, and secret passages in the governor's mansion. You cling to these stories like lifebuoys, even knowing they may be as hollow as the promises of mercy. Just before dawn, you rise again to the sound of waves, a constant reminder of freedom's proximity. You polish the bars of your cell with the sleeve of your tattered shirt, watching sea foam swirl in the moonlit harbor. You make a vow. If you ever escape this living prison, you will swim until exhaustion or until someone pulls you ashore, whichever comes first. And so ends part 3 of your descent into Port Royal's dungeons, a world where hope is more precious than gold, and freedom more fleeting than a candle's flame. Next time, we confront the final trial, the notorious Whirlpool Pit, the governor's ultimate punishment, and the daring schemes prisoners hatch in their last desperate bid for liberty. Stay tuned. You wake to the dull thud of the guard's boot against the cell door, the signal that today is no ordinary day. Word has spread through the damp corridors that this afternoon will bring the infamous Whirlpool Pit punishment, a cruel contraption of chain platforms suspended above the bay, designed to break the strongest of men. For those accused of mutiny, assaulting a jailer, or simply being too spirited, this is the finale, a spinning hell above shark-infested waters, where each rotation flings you closer to a watery grave. You still your nerves with foul gruel, knowing that even a single glance at the pit can turn your stomach. By mid-morning, the other prisoners, hardened veterans of flogging and forced labor, gather near the iron gates. They jostle and whisper, betting on who will be chosen. You pretend indifference, though your heart hammers against your ribs like a desperate drummer. The turnkey, Vance, summons the unlucky souls in his gravelly roar. A dozen men stumble forward, eyes wide with terror. They are marched out through winding corridors, their shouts fading into that endless stone maw, and you realize your name isn't called yet. Relief floods you, but guilt washes it away. Part of you envies their gruesome fate, for at least they will end this nightmare, one way or another. Afternoon sunlight filters through the barred windows as you're herded to the courtyard for your daily toil. Today, the overseer assigns you to stack cannonballs beside the governor's palace wall, heavy iron orbs that make your back threaten to snap. Sweat soaks your shirt, your lungs burn with each heave of your shoulders. The sharp tang of salt water mingles with sweat and blood, a perverse perfume of your captivity. Each cannonball you roll feels like a vote tethered to your soul. One more for the governor's war chest, one more to prolong your torment. Between shifts, you catch sight of the Whirlpool Pit through the barred gate, a circular wooden platform suspended by ropes spinning above the churning bay. Each plank is slick with sea spray, and from below you see fins slicing the water's surface. The stories say that screams echo off the limestone walls until they're swallowed by the tide. A hush falls over the courtyard whenever the pit is in motion, as if even the living refuse to breathe during that spectacle. Late afternoon brings your chance. A guard barked a whisper earlier. Last week's contraband, rum hidden in your mattress. Governor wants to make an example. You never found the contraband. Rats likely consumed the evidence, but the accusation sticks. Vance's boot nudges you forward. Your heart seizes as you realize you're next. The other prisoners watch, faces a gallery of pity and dread. You swallow, feeling your throat close as they slip a collar of iron around your neck and chain you to the plank. The world narrows to the creak of wood and the snap of ropes. The overseer gives the signal, and the platform tilts, then rotates, a slow, mechanical lurch that accelerates until you're spinning above the hungry waters. Salt spray lashes your face. Your hands tighten on the rope tethering you. Below, the bay swirls into a vortex, sharks circling like sentinels of doom. You fight nausea as the platform speeds up, your stomach twisting into knots. Time dilates. One rotation feels like an eternity of spinning emptiness. You grip the iron chain attached to the plank's edge, knuckles white as the wind roars in your ears. The tides tug at your feet, each pass closer to the platform's end where no wood remains, only the black maw of the ocean. You whisper your regrets, for your family, for the tavern you once loved, for every second you spent chasing a freedom you took for granted. The world tilts, slams you back, and you gasp for air that feels too thin. The governor's laughter echoes from the balcony above, a symphony of cruelty. Then a miracle. At the pit's apex, the overseer's whip cracks, and the platform halts. You dangle above the water, limp and trembling, spared for now. Your legs give out, and the chain restrains your fall, scraping metal against metal. Guards haul you back to solid ground, dragging you across pebbles until you collapse in a heap. You taste salt and fear and a newfound elation, alive, if only barely. Night falls like a shroud, and you are returned to your cell, gibbering and broken. The taste of brine lingers on your lips, a reminder of how close you came to eternity. But somewhere beneath your broken spirit, a spark ignites, the will to live, to plan, to escape. For if you can survive the whirlpool pit, perhaps you can survive anything. Over the next days, you conspire with Frank O'Malley, the deserting sailor, and Isabella, the runaway slave, your unlikely allies in the darkest of places. They smuggle scraps of iron from broken shackles, pilfer lenient guard spoons, and map the guard rotations. At midnight, when the moonlight slinks through the narrow slits, you exchange hushed whispers under the fetid straw. Each scrap of information is a rung on your ladder out of hell. Your plan hinges on the poorly secured hatch beneath the governor's dining hall. Guards there are lax, drunk on rum and complacency. You'll bribe the linen keeper to leave the latch unlatched, slip down into the wine cellars and surface into the pantry, then up the back stairs and out through the servants' exit. It's madness, but you've staved off death once. Desperation feels a lot like courage. The night arrives. Your heart pounds against your ribs as you wriggle through the narrow hatch, chest scraping against damp stone. Isabella waits below, candle flickering in her shaking hand. Frank holds the linen sack, ready to cover your tracks. A guard's snore echoes above. You press yourself against the wall, breath caught in your throat. The hatch creaks as you rise. The guard turns but doesn't notice, already lost to inebriation. You slip into the wine cellar. Barrels of sapid liquid line the walls, their aroma heady and disorienting. A single step, and you're through the trapdoor into the pantry. The kitchen's warmth hits you like a wave. Roasting meats, baking bread, heated iron. You follow the map Isabella drew in soot on a cook's floor. The back stairs are unguarded. The moon through a small window guides your ascent. At the top, you pause. The street outside is hushed, the only sound the roll of distant waves. You emerge into a narrow alley, limbs trembling but free. You glance back at the dim silhouette of the dungeons, its barred windows like watchful eyes. You share a look with Frank and Isabella, exhaustion, terror, and electric triumph coursing through you. You hurry away from Port Royal, feet slapping cobblestones, hearts pounding with each step farther from that living tomb. At the harbor's edge, you find a small fishing skiff, Frank's old haunt, and shove off into the bay. The cool water splashes over the sides, baptizing you in freedom's icy embrace. Behind you, the city's lights fade. Before you, the open sea stretches vast and uncharted. You row until your arms burn, until the dungeons are mere shadows on the horizon. You don't speak. Words are slim vessels, too small for the enormity of your escape. Instead, you breathe, deep and slow, tasting salt and life. Above, the sky erupts with stars, silent witnesses to your journey from despair to deliverance. At dawn, you beach on a deserted shore, collapse in the sand, and close your eyes. The sun warms your face. The ocean's lullaby soothes your trembling soul. You are free, scarred, haunted, but irrevocably alive. You think of the men still in those cells, your brothers in misery. You vow to tell their stories, to shine a light into Port Royal's darkness so the world won't forget their suffering. For now, though, you rest. You lift your gaze to the horizon, where sea meets sky in an endless promise. The nightmare of Port Royal's dungeons is behind you, but its lessons live on in your bones. That cruelty can be endured, that solidarity can bloom in the dankest corners, and that even when the odds are spun like the whirlpool pit, the human spirit can still seize a moment of grace and turn it into freedom. Picture yourself scaling sheer mountain passes at dawn, breath ragged in high-altitude air. Your only companions a flock of screaming condors and a colonel yelling in Quechua you barely understand. No GPS, no coffee cart, just 1,500 miles of rugged Inca roads, packed with gear heavier than your ambition. Sound like a grand adventure? Think again. Today, we embark on the grueling life of a conscript in the Inca Road Network Army, a story of blistered feet, deadly llamas, and bureaucracy so brutal it makes modern TBS reports look like child's play. Let's dive in. You awaken before first light, wrapped in a flimsy llama wool cloak that smells like wet alpaca and desperation. The conscription decree arrived 2 weeks ago. You're now part of the Mita labor draft, drafted to build and maintain the empire's arteries, those fabled Inca roads. No exemptions for your dodgy knee or your mother's fondness for you. The sun hasn't even yawned yet, but the local Karata, provincial governor, has. He barks orders in booming Quechua. Grab your tools, bind your loads, and move. You sling a woven basket across your back. Inside, chisels, wooden wedges, and half a week's rations of quinoa and dried potatoes. The weight pins your shoulders down like a particularly vindictive alpaca. You hobble toward the winding trail, passing fellow conscripts still fumbling with their tapestry maps, stick arrangements scrawled by Quipu accountants who apparently hated straight lines. They look at you with hollow, caffeine-deprived eyes, as though weeping for lost weekends. By sunrise, you're already mid-step on a narrow ledge carved into volcanic rock. Below, sheer drop-offs promise a one-way ticket to the underworld. A lone condor soars overhead, circling in the thermals, either scouting for carrion or judging your life choices. You grip your basket strap so tightly your hands go numb. Each breath in the thin air feels like swallowing lasers. Your guide, a stern-faced Chasqui messenger, trots alongside on nimble feet, carrying only a small knotted quipu for notes and messages. He expects you to catch up and pass him your Pachkilla tool roll without hesitation. Every time you slow for oxygen, he snaps, "Rapido!" as though moving faster in the Andes is just a matter of attitude. You wonder if Chasqui get hazard pay. Likely not, but they do earn bragging rights. By mid-morning, you reach the first work site, a collapsed retaining wall above a crucial mountain pass. The engineer, a spectacled Amauda master, points at the ruins and lectures you on the proper stone-fitting technique. Chisel here, wedge there, avoid using too much force that might cause an avalanche. Then he vanishes into the foliage, claiming he must consult the astronomical alignment records. You're left with 20 conscripts, a pile of boulders, and a chasm yawning like a hungry puma. You get to work. First, you heave a rock half your size to the edge. You brace your feet, call upon every muscle, and shove. It slides, then teeters, then tumbles down the mountainside with a roar that sets off a cascade of smaller rocks. Your very own avalanche audition. You narrowly avoid being buried alive by your own handiwork, scrambling backward as dust and pebbles rain down. The other conscripts gape, some stifle nervous laughter. The coy llamas grazing nearby remain serenely oblivious. After salvaging the smaller rubble, you attempt to chisel a new stone to fit the gap. Your chisel slips on the slick rock face, grazing your thumb and sending a hot jolt of pain up your arm. You wrap it with a scrap of your cloak, the makeshift bandage already soggy with blood and sweat. Appetite vanishes, replaced by a throbbing reminder that bleeding in the Andes can be life-threatening, especially when the nearest healer is 3 days away, riding a mule named Tentacles. Lunchtime offers no reprieve. You dig into a pouch of charqui, dried llama meat tougher than leather. It tastes like chewing on the Inca Empire's own defiance. You wash it down with icy stream water from a nearby spring. No purification, no temperature check. You swallow grit and gravel along with your meal, because filtering water is apparently a luxury for the privileged. Nearby, Chasqui sprint past, delivering messages of vital military campaigns. You envy their speed, their minimal loads, and the fact that they wear sandals instead of industrial-strength baskets. Afternoon shifts you to drainage duties, carving stone gutters to channel meltwater away from switchbacks. The work requires precision, miscalculate, and the entire road could collapse in the next rainy season, sending supply caravans and perhaps you plunging into oblivion. Your pickaxe strikes a hidden quartz vein and sparks fly, momentarily blinding you. You blink through tears, heart hammering, and whisper a hasty apology to the mountain. Hours blur as you carve and sweep, your lungs screaming for oxygen, your legs quaking like newborn alpacas. Every step on the narrow path sends a shiver through your spine. You realize you haven't felt your toes in hours, numb from cold and fear. When a sudden wind gust rattles loose pebbles, you leap away from the edge like your spirit left your body. By late afternoon, the Amauda returns, clipboard quipu in hand, inspecting each chisel mark. He nods once, possibly satisfied, possibly simply relieved you haven't killed yourself yet, and hands you a strip of cocoa leaves. A blessing? A bribe? Whatever it is, you tuck it under your tongue. The stimulant eases the altitude headache, but tastes like bitter hope and desperation. As dusk approaches, you and your fellow conscripts gather at a temporary campsite beside the trail. You build a fire from alpine wood that smells of resin and sorrow. Dinner is more charqui, plus a watery stew of quinoa and wild herbs that might be poison, or might just taste awful. You share stories. A young man recruited from faraway Cusco boasted he'd be home in time for planting season. Now he admits he's nearly lost his mind. An old shepherd says the stones speak to him at night, confessing the screams of past laborers. Nightfall brings even harsher trials. No tents, just a thin blanket and a sky so clear, the stars glare at you with cosmic indifference. You lie awake shivering, listening to the creak of ropes tethering your gear and the distant howl of mountain cats. Sleep teases you, but the cold is alchemic. It turns dreams into nightmares of falling indefinitely. When dawn's first light kisses the peaks, you rise stiff as a carved statue. You nurse your bruises, roll your aching shoulders, and remind yourself, this is just part 1. Tomorrow, you'll navigate the dreaded Unga Pass and perhaps stumble into enemy territory. But for now, you gather your basket, choke down the last bitter sips of coca tea, and step onto the trail again, because in the Inca Empire, the road waits for no one. You blink awake to a sky already bruised purple by dawn's early light. Your shoulders scream from yesterday's labor, and every muscle protests at the thought of another day on the mid-road crew. But duty, Inca duty, rubber stamp authority, waits for no one's aches. You rise, wrap your llama wool cloak tighter around your shoulders, and prepare to tackle the next section of the Empire's infamous highway, the dreaded Unga Pass, where mountains erupt into tropical gullies and the air shifts from icy to humid in minutes. Before you depart, the Amada gathers the conscripts and issues today's orders. 3 kilometers of road cutting, 10 drainage channels, and don't lose your baskets. He eyes you like a professor eyeing undergrads who skipped last night's reading. You swallow hard, adjust the load of chisels and wedges, and follow the chasqui down the switchbacks, each step a negotiation between gravity and sanity. An hour in, the trail narrows to a single slab of stone, barely wider than your foot. On one side, an ascent of jagged cliff. On the other, a sheer drop into jungle so dense you can almost hear the animals breathing. You cling to the wall, heart hammering as sweat drips into your eyes. A rat-sized monkey chitters overhead, mocking or warning you, you can't tell. One misstep and you'll tumble into a tangle of vines and venomous serpents. You imagine the headlines, Conscript enjoys one-way trip down cliffside, and shudder. Mid-morning brings the first taste of tropical misery, humidity so thick it drips from your cloak like rain. You reach a point where the mountain wall is too steep to carve by hand. The Amauta signals, and men break out bundles of palm fiber ropes. Your task, anchor lines to buttress stones and lower them down to level ground. You knot the rope, loop it around the boulder, and signal the chasqui above to release. The stone groans on its ropes, scraping ancient wall etchings, and you hang back as it slides past. A loose groove sends it careening, barely missing your ankle but shattering your confidence. You dive aside, breathe raggedly, and realize the jungle floor loves accidents. By noon, hunger returns with tropical fervor. The chasqui hands out new rations, flat discs of maize and tubers, rolled in chili paste so spicy it sears your throat. You chew greedily, sweat mingling with chili as mosquitoes descend in hungry swarms. You slap at them, drawing the amusement of nameless conscripts from other provinces. Their dialects clash in the humid air, a cacophony of desperation and disbelief that you're all stuck here, building roads for emperors you've never seen. Afternoon's assignment feels almost merciful by comparison. Clearing overgrowth. The jungle encroaches on the Inca roads like a living carpet, roots prying loose stones, vines strangling wayposts. Armed with machetes, crude but ruthless, you hack at the green chaos. Each swing sends sap spraying like toxins. You slice through a vine, expecting relief, only to disturb a nest of stinging ants. They swarm your forearms, biting in unison. You yelp, abandon the machete, and dance a clumsy jig. When the swarm finally disperses, you inspect your wounds. Red welts, oozing pain. You dab mud on them as a makeshift poultice, hoping the jungle's bacteria are polite today. A sudden thunderclap crackles overhead. Dark clouds billow, releasing torrential rain within moments. You and your comrades scramble for makeshift shelter beneath banana leaves and carved stone overhangs. The deluge turns loose soil into slick mud, sending torrents down the hillside like eager rivers. You huddle under a rock alcove, water sluicing past your knees, cold seeping through cloak and skin. The Chasqui paces atop a boulder, shouting orders in Quechua. Protect the worksite, secure the ropes. But all you can think is, protect my limbs. The rain won't stop and you're standing ankle deep in a mire that threatens to swallow your boots. When the storm finally subsides, the worksite is a mess. Washed out roads, collapsed trenches, mudslides that have to be scooped by hand before you can continue. You gape at the destruction, wiping rain from your eyes. The Amauta sighs, shakes his head, and orders you back to chiseling rock, now twice as tedious with water-slick tools and shivering hands. You curse the Empire, the weather gods, and the very concept of progress, all in one breathless exhalation. Late afternoon heralds a new ordeal. The supply caravan must pass. Merchants with llamas laden with coca leaf, textiles, and chicha beer follow the road you're rebuilding. You're tasked with guiding them safely through the mud. You grasp pommels of locked jugs, balance burdens on your shoulder, and inch sideways down the ledges. Ahead, a merchant's llama balks, braying in panic at slick stone. You shove its haunches, it lunges forward, right toward the abyss. You lunge, grab its reins, and the two of you teeter on the brink. The merchant screams, the llama bleats. You wrestle control, coax it back to solid ground, and collapse in relief. The caravan moves on, leaving you to question why anyone would trade sanity for Empire's riches. As dusk approaches, legs trembling like newborn quail, you trudge back to the Conscript camp, an open clearing ringed by ferns and wild orchids that mock you with their beauty. Fire pits hiss in the growing gloom. Small flames dance like mocking spirits. You light a fire from damp sticks, coaxing smoke and spark until you can roast a few wild tubers found along the road. Dinner is meager, tuber and a mouthful of maize beer, but the warmth of the fire feels almost luxurious. Night brings another challenge, altitude plague. Though the jungle lies far below, the pass hovers at a thin air threshold. Your chest tightens, each breath is a labor. The nights are bone-chilling, and your single blanket offers little solace. You huddle beside the fire, sharing coca tea that numbs your hunger but stings your soul with bitterness. You listen to the jungle's nocturnal choir, frogs croaking, insects whirring, hidden predators prowling. Sleep arrives in fitful waves, nightmares of plummeting off cliffs and crushing boulders chasing you through the darkness. Before dawn, you awaken, pack your baskets, and steel yourself for another day. You glance at the winding ribbon of road below, carved into mountainsides, bridging valleys, slicing through jungle. It's the Empire's lifeblood, and your personal torment. You wrap your cloak, tighten the basket straps, and shoulder your tools. The rising sun fires the peaks in gold and crimson, a beautiful greeting you can't appreciate. You step forward onto the road you helped build, heart heavy, spirit stubborn, and march onward. Because tomorrow, the Mita continues, and so does your journey through absurdity, agony, and the relentless march of the Inca road network. You wake before dawn to a world painted silver by moonlight, glinting off stone road markers. Your muscles protest every movement, but the Mita grinds on. Today's leg of the journey takes you into the heart of the high Andean ice slope, where the trail climbs from humid jungle to a glacial pass at 15,000 feet. Altitude sickness here isn't a rumor, it's a badge of honor or a death sentence. By first light, you and your crew, now winnowed to the toughest dozen after 2 days of jungle fever and mudslides, forge onward up the switchbacks. The air thins so quickly you gasp with every step, lungs burning like embers. Behind you, the road snakes down into emerald canopy. Ahead, it disappears into swirling mist. Your Amauta, eyes hooded against the cold, recites Inca cosmology in Quechua. Pachamama's breath grows icy. Honor her with sacrifice. You're pretty sure your sacrifice is 4 fingers of flesh lost to frostbite. Mid-morning brings the first test, a massive snowdrift blocking the road. You and your comrades dig in, chisels biting into ice that snaps like brittle bone. You tunnel a path just wide enough for a laden llama to pass. Every swing of the ice pick sends shards flying, some embedding in your wool tunic like silver confetti. Your fingers feel like frozen sticks, but each shovel of cold white snow is a triumph, until you realize this isn't the only drift. There are 3 more ahead. At the second drift, you learn the art of the human snowplow. 4 conscripts link arms and charge downhill into the drift, bodies piling up like rag dolls. You're the lead, diving headfirst into ice so cold it steals your breath. You claw forward, scraping snow aside, until a backhand shove from behind sends you tumbling into the drift's center. You emerge coughing icicles, vision blurred, but victory. A narrow lane through the glacier. By noon, the sun hiccups through clouds, offering no warmth. You pause on a rocky ledge to catch your breath and nibble at sharky hardened by the altitude. Your tongue sticks to the dried meat. You curse the Empire for not including coca leaves in your ration for high passes. A few locals, herders from a distant puna, lead a string of llamas bound for Cusco. They nod at you with pity. Tourists, they must think. Yet their silent understanding is the first kindness you felt in days. Afternoon's labor is mortaring loose stones into retaining walls to prevent spring melt from washing out the road. You scoop glacial silt into a crude lime mixture, an eye-stinging paste that burns more than your frost-nipped hands. As you press stones into place, a sudden spray of meltwater cascades down the slope, drenching you head to toe. The shock jolts your bones into protest. You swear you'll never complain about jungle rain again. As daylight wanes, the true horror of the ice slope reveals itself. The hollow bridge, a narrow span of logs and woven cane stretched over a yawning crevasse. Today you must reinforce it. You approach the bridge's edge, peering down at vanishing depths. No bottom in sight, only swirling snowmelt rushing into oblivion. You step onto the woven crossing, it shudders under your weight, ropes creaking like dying insects. You grip the guide ropes overhead and shuffle forward, a basket of heavy mortar balanced on your back. Midway, a loud crack echoes as a rotten cane rung snaps. You lunge, shifting your weight with all your might, and the bridge heals your misstep by refusing to break. Just this once. Safe on the far side, you collapse and empty your basket, heart pounding. Other conscripts follow, each with equal terror etched on their faces. You share a collective breath, shaky but triumphant. You've cheated death and delivered mortar for the bridge's repair. Nightfall greets you with bone-chilling wind gusts whipping the pass into a frenzy. There are no tents, only a pit of wind-scoured stones and a single blanket per 2 men. You huddle with your fellow conscript from Part 1, the one who brags he's seen worse. He's learned not to brag anymore. Together you press your backs against each other, sharing the meager warmth of damp wool. You sip thin soup of quinoa and glacier water, the broth tasteless but life-giving. Sleep arrives in fits. You dream of slipping on the hollow bridge, tumbling into the crevasse, your screams carried away by the wind god. You jolt awake with every phantom slip, heart racing. At one point, you wake to find your companion gone. He's stumbled outside in delirium, shouting at ghosts. Guards find him at dawn, half-frozen, eyes glazed. They haul him back by the scruff of his tunic. He's incoherent, but alive. You vow never to mock a fever dream again. When the first pale fingers of dawn appear, you rise. Even though your body protests in languages you didn't know existed, you trudge to the bridge site to find the Amada already inspecting last night's makeshift repairs. He nods once, approval or merely acknowledgement is anyone's guess, and motions you forward for the finishing touches. You steady your trembling hands and apply the last stones mortared firmly in place. As mid-morning sun melts the frost, the conscript caravan crosses the hollow bridge for the first time since repairs. You watch llamas and pack rats traverse safely. Even the chasqui darts across with effortless grace. A sense of pride pulses through you, brief and brittle, like an icicle on a cliff edge. By midday, you descend the pass toward an Inca, Tambos, way station, a stone inn of sorts used by messengers and imperial administrators. You collapse on its low walls, limbs useless. Inside, you find stores of coca tea, fresh maize beer, and a fire hearth, and fellow travelers who eye you like a living zombie. They offer you a steaming cup of coca. Its bitter warmth slides down your throat, chasing away the chill that never fully leaves your bones. As you rest, they exchange tales of the route ahead, more high passes, desert plateaus, and the final stretch through arid plains where ambushes by hostile tribes are rumored. You nibble on flatbread, savoring its softness, and realize how much you've changed, from a reluctant conscript to a battle-scarred road warrior. Half dead but unbroken, late afternoon, you gather your tools one last time in the Tambo's courtyard. The Amada delivers your orders for the final work site, a series of drainage culverts to be hewn out of volcanic rock. Precision, he intones, for tomorrow's rains. You nod, muscles stiff, but a spark of determination ignites. You remember the narrow streets of your village, the warm hearth waiting there, and the thought of home strengthens each strike of your chisel. As the sun dips below the Andean horizon, you etch tally marks into a smooth stone. Days spent, days remaining. You light a small fire and huddle close, sharing the warmth with companions who've become brothers in misery. The wind howls outside, but inside the Tambos you taste hope for the first time in weeks. Hope that one day you'll walk these roads not as a conscript, but as a free man, telling tales of curses and triumphs in equal measure. Tomorrow will bring more hardship, but tonight you rest in a reprieve carved out by empire, and by your own stubborn will to endure. You close your eyes to the crackle of fire, dreaming not of glacial falls, but of sun-drenched valleys where the road ends and home begins. You rise before dawn's pale glow, every sinew still stiff from the day before's labor in the volcanic culvert. There's no marmalade on toast to soothe your creaking joints, only the bitter tang of coca tea and the promise of one last brutal shift. Your fellow conscripts stir around the Tambo's courtyard, hunchbacked men rubbing their eyes, muttering prayers to the mountain gods for mercy that never comes. You shoulder your pack, grate your chisel against your belt, and steel yourself for the final assault on the Inca road. By first light, the Amada briefs the crew. Today's job is to carve a series of subterranean channels beneath a perilous switchback, where spring floods have turned the slope into a hazard's course of mudslides and collapsing rock. He gestures at the jagged wall opposite, a sheer face shot through with veins of obsidian and quartz. Precision, he repeats, or the road and you will wash away. His eyes glint through pale dawn mist, and you wonder if he's part engineer, part sadist. You and 8 others scramble up the slick path to the worksite, stones crunching underfoot. The air is thin but heavy with humidity rising from a hidden ravine below. Your first task, drill hand-sized holes in the rock to insert wooden wedges soaked in water, forcing cracks to open. You place a wedge, pound it with your hammer, and watch in horror as the rock shatters in a shower of sparks and shards. One flying splinter grazes your cheek, no minor wound in these altitudes, and you taste coppery blood. You lick your lips, wipe your face on your sleeve, and press on. Injury is merely another badge of honor here. Mid-morning sun slants sideways, catching on the raw channels you've carved so far. Long, winding tunnels that must withstand torrents of meltwater. You hoist sacks of lime-rich mortar into position, then smear it over the rough walls, sealing seams and reinforcing the stone. The mortar slips through your gloved fingers in places, collapsing patches that demand re-chiseling. Each collapse taunts you, a reminder that nature's fury isn't appeased by half measures. You mutter curses in Quechua, Spanish, and every language you know, your tongue thick with dust. Lunch arrives in the form of a tattered llama wool sack passed down the line, a smattering of charqui, a brittle maize cake, and a handful of wild mint leaves to flavor the stew. You divide the rations equally, though the stronger conscripts scoff at sharing. You force chew each bite, swatting away insects drawn by the faint aroma of salt and sweat. One conscript, a wiry youth from the coastal valleys, tries to barter a chunk of his biscuit for 2 of your mint leaves. You agree, rationalizing that flavor is the only luxury left. His eyes widen as the mint cools his tongue. You smile, savoring that tiny victory. Afternoon brings a thunderous crack as the ravine above you disgorges a torrent of water and sediment. The sluice you're reinforcing trembles, mortar cracking under the pressure. You and 2 comrades scramble to hold back the flood, jamming planks and stones into the breach until the water diverts down the new channel. Your arms shake, back arches in protest, but you refuse to relent. This is your crowning moment, the culmination of weeks spent carving and shoveling. When at last the torrent subsides, you stand panting, drenched, triumphant. The Amada emerges from his inspection, nodding once at your handiwork. Buen trabajo, he says, his voice echoing through the culvert like distant thunder. He hands you a sprig of eucalyptus, another stimulant, and praises your resilience. You tuck the leaves under your tongue, feeling a burst of cooling fire in your chest. For a moment, the ache in your muscles recedes, replaced by a fierce pride. You've battled mud, ice, altitude sickness, and the Empire's unforgiving demands, and you've won. As dusk gathers, you descend the switchback toward the tambos, the newly reinforced culvert gleaming behind you. The Shaski darts past, delivering urgent missives, an upcoming military inspection, more Meta laborers en route, and fresh rumors of rebellion in distant provinces. You scoff at the thought of more work, and you've already ascended and descended every mountain range in sight. But the Empire's needs never end. You glance skyward at a lone condor riding the evening thermals, wishing you could soar away as easily. Back at the tambos, the fire pits glow in the darkening courtyard. You sit cross-legged on a flat stone, dipping chunks of quinoa stew into a tar-thick sauce while the others exchange stories. One veteran conscript, silver-haired and stooped, speaks of the time the road above a glacier gave way, sweeping half his squad into the abyss. He survived by clinging to an outcrop like a limpet. You listen, bones rattling at the memory, then raise your cup of maize beer and toast all who endure. The handful of survivors clink their cups, a chorus of metal on clay, a pact of shared suffering. Night brings a final ritual, the tally of days. The Amada distributes small clay tokens, each inscribed with a notch representing a day of service. You take yours, today's notch carved with jagged care, and study it by firelight. 74 days. 74 days of sun, storm, blood, and sweat. You press the token to your chest, where your heart thrums beneath layers of wool and leather. Each notch is a lesson etched into your flesh, that endurance can be forged in hardship, that solidarity can blossom in the direst circumstances, that survival is an act of will stronger than any empire. Before you drift to sleep on your thin blanket, you think of home. Terraced fields bathed in morning mist, the scent of fresh maize in the air, the laughter of children chasing ducks through irrigation canals. You imagine planting season, when your family will need your hands, not your chisels. The thought warms you more thoroughly than any fire. You tuck the clay token beneath your tunic, whisper a prayer to Pachamama, and close your eyes. At first light, you'll gather your tools one last time, step onto the polished stones of the road you helped build, and march back toward Cusco, leaving the tambos and its memories behind. You'll retrace the path of countless travelers, merchants, messengers, soldiers, each carving their own stories into these ancient highways. Your story will be one of absurdity and agony, of triumph and the sweetness of simple survival. And when you stand at the city gates, battered but unbroken, you'll know that the road ends not at distant horizons, but in the resolute heart of every man who dares to endure. Imagine carving firewood at dawn with fingers so numb they feel like frozen sausages, sipping hot coffee that's actually just melted snow with a dash of dirt, and realizing winter will trap you in a log cabin for months with nothing but rats, frostbite, and your relatives' poor hygiene to keep you company. Sounds delightful, thought not. Today we're diving into how frontier settlers in early America endured bone-chilling winters that could turn even a seasoned homesteader into a shivering mess of regret. Hold onto your wool blankets, it's going to be a rough ride. The first frost hits like an overdue bill. You see it on the window panes before you feel it in your bones. It's late October, though Granny's moon calendar insisted winter wouldn't arrive until November. You've barely a stack of firewood, and your corn crib brews is half full. Your husband Joe assures you, "We'll be fine, we've got faith," which is a nice sentiment until faith fails to light on fire or keep you warm. You haul your daughters out at dawn to chop hemlock logs from the clearing. Each strike of the axe feels less like productivity and more like incremental self-mutilation. Splinters the size of toothpicks stab your palms, and your breath fogs in front of your face like an angry ghost. By mid-morning, your fingers refuse to bend. You shove them into Joe's muff, but he grumbles they're too soft and ruin the grip on the saw. So you resort to holding your axe handle between your chin and chest, swinging wildly like an amateur lumberjack, hoping the forest beats you to ice cream brain. When the curve finally splits in two, you tumble backward, narrowly missing a low branch that would have taught you what a concussion feels like in winter. Back at the cabin, you pile wood around the stone hearth, building a pyramid of fuel you hope won't collapse like the pyramids did in Egypt, though those were made of sandstone, not brittle hemlock, and didn't need to warm soggy socks. You strike flint and steel until your knuckles bleed, sparking embers that refuse to catch on damp kindling. When your daughter Mary sneezes, a gust of wind scatters the sparks like mocking fireflies. You curse colonial flint for being less reliable than modern spark plugs. Finally, the fire roars to life. You press your frozen limbs to the hearthstone, whispering sweet words to the flames. Joe slings a pot of rabbit stew onto the hearth support. Tonight's dinner, flavored by a concession to famine. A handful of dried berries you swore you'd save for medicinal tea. They clatter into the broth, turning it an unappetizing shade of gray. You ladle a spoonful and swallow it with dignity, borrowed from someone who's never tasted squirrel-flavored gruel. As midday sun creeps weakly through the smoke-darkened window, you decide it's time for your weekly chore, hauling water. You don your patch-through wool cloak, failing to notice the rat curled in the hem, your unofficial roommate since basement flooding last spring. You kick it free with your boot, it squeaks insultingly. Undeterred, you set out for the spring half a mile away, balancing the heavy pail on your hip. Each footstep crunches over ice that's formed into treacherous sheets, turning the trail into your own private luge track. You slip. The pail flies from your grasp, water sloshing out to baptize the snow. You curse your ancestors for choosing a climate where water freezes faster than your neighbor's gossip. At the spring, you break through the crusted layer of ice on the surface, chisel in hand. Each hammer blow sends icy shards spraying, some embedding in your cheek. You grit your teeth, remind yourself you're tougher than frost, and pry the pail free. You fill it, then brace for the return trip. The ice now has your blood on it, making it extra slippery. You sidestep, crab walking, until you reach the edge of the woods, only to discover that Chip, the neighbor's goat, has chewed through your only pair of leather mittens. You faceplant into the snow, pail crashing on your back, and for a moment consider a frostbite could be merciful. Back at the cabin, you dump the icy water into the barrel by the hearth. It hisses, thawing into nothing in seconds. You scoop up the remainder, shiver, and leap aside as steam billows like a miniature ghost. The rats, feeling emboldened by your misfortune, scurry forward to lick up the remaining drops. Now it's afternoon, and chores remain unending. Tearing the roof's leaks before the first blizzard, mending your husband's mittens. Hope you have thread that isn't eaten through by moths. But of course, tending to the chickens. Except your chickens have retreated into the nesting boxes, refusing to move in sub-zero temperatures. You drag them out by the legs, only to have them peck at your ankles in royal chicken indignation. They cluck as if mocking your mortal status. You tuck them into a burlap sack for shelter, ignoring their furious squawking, and vow to make chicken pot pie once summer returns. As dusk falls, you light more candles, smaller, fainter, thankless little flames that do little to fend off the gathering gloom. The cabin's corners fill with shadows that twist like monsters, and you can hear the wind's keening howl through chinks in the logs. Mary complains of nightmares. Her breath smells of dissolved icicles. You hold her close, whispering tales of summer days by the creek, hoping nostalgia can substitute for a blanket. Night brings the true test, sleep. You prepare your bed, a pallet of straw topped with animal furs you swore you'd wash, but never did. The rats have already turned it into a communal playground. You brush aside tufts of rodent hair and crawl in beside your husband, who snores like a wounded bear. His body heat radiates in intermittent waves, alternating between Arctic breeze and volcanic furnace. You nestle into the warm spot, trying to avoid bone-rattling cold and scorching sweat. You set the candle on the windowsill, hoping it lasts until dawn. Under the heavy quilt, you drift between shivers and sweat, imagining you're sinking into an icy swamp one moment and burning in a furnace the next. You count breaths, not sheep, chiefly because you slaughtered your last sheep for New Year's soup and can't bear to imagine adding one more to the stew pot. Your teeth chatter a Morse code of distress until, mercifully, exhaustion claims you. By the time you wake, it's still dark, and you realize winter never sleeps. You brace for another day of frozen insanity, clinging to the hope that somewhere beyond the pine-strewn horizon lies spring. But, for now, the frontier winter remains undefeated, and so must you, if only to keep the rats from inheriting your piece of the American dream. To be continued in Part 2, how settlers improvised heating, tamed fierce snowstorms, and dealt with feast or famine rations that tested the limits of human dignity and taste buds. Stay tuned for more frosty horrors and sarcastic survival tips. You awaken to a world glazed in white. Every branch, every fence post, every disappointment blanketed by relentless snow. The first task of the morning is heating the cabin without turning it into an oven or burning down your homestead. Your husband Joe insists on stoking the fire with green wood. "It'll dry out as it burns," he claims, which only produces choking smoke that stings your eyes and coats the rafters in tarry residue. You open the cabin door to let out the black plumes, and a gust of wind nearly blows you back inside, slamming the door on your heel. You curse both the wind and Joe's forestry expertise as you wheeze back to the hearth. Determined to improve matters, you rig a makeshift flue from an old metal pail and scraps of tin, fashioning a short chimney that juts through the roof. The neighbors across the frozen creek call it modern ingenuity and also a death trap, but you don't care. You haul the pail onto the roof, losing a mitten in the process to a sneaky gap in the snowpack, and drop it down through the loft hatch. Joe secures it with rope, and you light the fire again. To your amazement, smoke now streams out of the pale chimney instead of choking the cabin. You celebrate with a high five, until you realize the roof's sagging where the pail forces the logs apart. You swap celebration for panic and scramble back up to reinforce the rafters, stakes of spruce wedged against the pail. The neighbors now call it the Leaning Tower of Colonial Pisa, but hey, at least your lungs work again. Morning chores complete, you face the weekly storm protocol. A vicious nor'easter is expected tonight, and without proper preparations, your cabin will be swept into the forest like unwanted Christmas decorations. You begin boarding up the windows with spare planks, cursing the day you nailed all those boards vertically instead of horizontally. The storm shutters, cleverly crafted last spring by your neighbor Tom, are nowhere to be found. Tom admits he traded them to the smith for a rifle barrel and feels no regret. You swallow the urge to strangle him with rosemary sprigs. Instead, you nail the spare planks at odd angles and pray. Now comes roof raking. You hurl handfuls of scraped snow from the roof edge to prevent collapse. Each scoop is a mini avalanche, staggering you backward and nearly sending you into the chicken coop. You wave off the scornful look from the hens who huddle in a corner unamused by your human struggles. After a dozen runs, your back threatens to give out. You wonder if pulling teeth without anesthetic would be less excruciating. By midday, the storm arrives on schedule. A roaring wall of wind, ice pellets, and flying debris. You and Joe hunker down, listening as the wind's howl escalates to a deafening roar, shaking the cabin like a ship in a tempest. You realize the importance of a good latch. Yours is a flimsy hook that snaps on the first gust. Joe dashes outside in his wool trousers to reattach it, disappearing into the haze. You hear a scream, your own, when a loose board slams against the porch post. For 5 agonizing minutes, you're certain Joe has been launched skyward by the wind. Then he reappears, coat flapping, triumphant over a new latch crafted from a horseshoe and baling wire. You embrace him, grateful he's alive, and vow never to doubt the horseshoe's magic again. Afternoon chores shift to water management. The spring has iced over solid, and your pail method from last week fails under the weight of a 2-inch cap of ice. You hack at it with an axe, spraying shards across the yard, and into your face when the handle slips. You end up melting snow in your iron kettle, a tedious process requiring near constant supervision at the hearth. You ladle steaming water into your copper bucket, careful not to scald your hands, then carry it out to refill the barrels before they freeze solid. Each trip is a gamble. Outside, the wind cuts through your cloak like a knife, and the ground is a sheet of black ice. You shuffle sideways like a speed skater in polka boots, muttering pleas to the weather gods and any saint within earshot. With water and heat under quasi-control, you turn to food preservation. Your root cellar, half-buried latticework lined with straw, seems cozy until you poke your head inside and discover the bottom foot of carrots have frozen solid. Your squash, however, has rotted thanks to neglect last month when you were busy chasing down runaway goats. You drag everything inside, hack away frost from the tubers, and stew them into a porridge that tastes like winter itself, bland, gritty, and slightly sour. Joe adds whiskey for flavor, which warms the inside but won't fool your taste buds. You down a bowl and gingerly place the rest in a crock pot by the fire, where it will hopefully thaw and soften overnight. Late afternoon introduces the great mousetrap arms race. The rodents in your cabin have grown brazen. They drag bits of flour from the sack, chew through dried meat, and even gnaw at the corners of your Bible. Sacrilege. You set simple wooden traps at first. They catch one meager mouse who you dispatch with a shovel and bury outside in the snow. The next night, 3 more are caught. Infuriated, you upgrade to metal snap traps baited with bacon rind. By tomorrow, you hope to have a pile of furry corpses grand enough to barter for fresh flour. Your daughters giggle at this ghoulish harvest, and you swear they'll learn to cook rodent stew if this continues. Dinner is a communal affair of sorts. The extended Johnson clan visits, bringing supplies from their larger homestead 5 miles away. They arrive as a ragtag caravan, ox-pulled sled carrying grains, a broken sleigh with a hole in the runners, and Aunt Martha perched on a bale of hay complaining about the cold. You greet them with hot porridge and whiskey shots, because if your guests don't freeze to death, they deserve a drink. They exchange gossip on colonial politics, the king's taxes, and rumors of revolution brewing in distant cities. You listen politely, thinking the only revolution you care about is one that brings summer back. As dusk approaches, you survey the cabin's defenses. Windows are boarded, roof is scraped, snowdrifts buried the porch but haven't breached the door. You feel acceptable, barely. The storm continues outside, wind shrieking like a banshee. You light every candle you have, tapers on the hearth, tallow lamps on the table, hoping any flicker of light will keep despair at bay. The cabin's interior glows like a medieval shrine to domestic fortitude. Shadows dance on the log walls, and you imagine they're applauding your ingenuity. Nightfall brings one final test, the sleepover strategy. You've devised a rotation so that one adult remains awake at all times to tend the fire and spot roof collapses. Tonight, it's your turn. You don your extra layers, wool shirt, flannel shift, patched cloak, and settle on the floor beside the hearth. A wooden stool serves as your pillow. Your body aches in places you forgot existed, but you feel oddly triumphant. You've kept the cabin standing, the fire burning, and the family safe for another day. You stare at embers, listening to the storm's constant roar. In the flickering light, you see the outlines of your children buried in blankets, breathing softly. You wonder how many more nights like this you can endure before frostbite or madness claims someone. Yet sleep beckons in short waves. Your eyelids grow heavy as the embers fade, and you whisper a half-lucid prayer. Let dawn come soon. Let your body hold up. Let summer's memories see you through. Tomorrow, the storm may break, revealing a world transformed. Drifts tall as your waist, broken fences to mend, crops to replant, and neighbors in need of aid. You'll don your boots, now stiff as boards, and venture into the white wasteland once more. But tonight, you rest, cradled by the hearth's warmth, defiantly alive amid the frontier's brutal winter. You awake to a smell that could wake the dead, if the dead had noses, boiling herbs from the cauldron, a concoction you swear tastes like pine needles macerated in swamp water. Your husband Joe hovers with a wooden spoon like a sorcerer, ladling you a thick green gag. It's yesterday's harvest of spruce tips, dandelion leaves, and a pinch of elderflower. He swears it soothes the cough rattling in your chest. You swallow it anyway, lodging most of it under your tongue until you can spit it behind the woodpile. Between coughs, you admit you feel worse than a drowned raccoon. This, dear viewer, is part 3 of Frontier Winter Survival, when sickness stalks your cabin like a wolf pack, and every wheeze is a funeral bell. The earliest settlers had no doctor's bag, only folk remedies and prayers to whoever was listening. When illness struck, families banded together. Today, you'll see how you fight fever, mend broken bones, and keep the spirits up when hope seems as scarce as a thaw in January. Mercifully, the cough retreating into your chest by midday, you drag yourself to the workbench for chores. Snow still blankets everything, but the sun offers a hint of mildness. You decide to clear a path to the barn before the next storm buries it again. Your daughters trudge behind, their cheeks rosy with mischief, or frostbite, you can't remember which. Armed with a short-handled shovel, you hack at the drifts. Each shovelful is a victory, each fall back into the snow a lesson in humility. You pause every few minutes to catch your breath, an exercise in gratitude that the air remains breathable. At the barn, you uncover a collapsed feed trough. The wood rotted under winter's weight, and half the roof now sags over the animals. You jury-rig a repair. A fallen pine branch becomes a brace, wedged beneath a bent rafter. The goats eye you as though you're both rescuer and lunatic. You pat them on the head, gleefully oblivious to goat math, because without them, your milk supply vanishes. Inside, you find a wounded hen, a wing bent at an unnatural angle from the snow's pressure. The poor bird crouches on one foot, bleeding softly, feathers matted. You scoop her up, heart aching. There is no vet, only your own 2 hands and a prayer to St. Francis of Assisi. You wrap her wing in clean linen, bind it with spare twine, and tuck her into a makeshift splint of twigs. You'll watch her like a hawk, goat milk and porridge compulsory, hoping nature stubborn will stitch his bone and tendon. Back at the cabin, Joe smokes his pipe by the hearth. His eyes go wide when you present the hen in a basket. "She'll starve if she can't scratch," he says. You shrug. "Then she'll starve," you reply, in what you hope passes for frontier gallows humor. He nods, shovels more herbs into the stew pot, and offers you a spoon. You take a sip, better than pine swamp, but only barely. Come afternoon, a more serious crisis unfolds. Scurvy. You notice Joe's gums bleeding as he chews tough beef jerky. Your own joints ache with a stiffness beyond normal cold. Citrus fruits are a dream shipped on slow boats. Settlers relied on preserved greens. You remember last summer's stash of pickled ramps and wild mustard greens, buried in the root cellar behind barrels of turnips. You shiver at the thought of crawling into that cold, dark hole, but scurvy is worse than frostbite. You don your tattered cloak, fetch a lantern, and descend into the cellar. The air is dank, root crops line the walls in straw bales. You paw through the jars until you find the ramp pickles, cloudy brine, floating garlic scapes. You lift the jar to the lantern light, an emerald promise. Back in the cabin, you open it with a pop, inhale the vinegary scent, and hand Joe a spear of softened ramp. His face lights up like a child on Christmas morning. You each bite down, tear-rolled juice flooding your mouth, and realize for the first time this year what real food tastes like. In the days that follow, you ration the ramps, 2 spears per person per meal. Your cough eases, your gums settle, and Joe's creaking joints hum a happier tune. You record the victory on scrap bark. Ramps saved souls on the 14th of January. You tuck that note into your Bible margin, a bookmark in the story of survival. But winter isn't just physical torment, it's mental warfare. Hours stretch like the low horizon, and cabin walls shrink until they feel like a coffin. To combat cabin fever, you revive parlor games. Card games, you have none. Bored? None. So you invent Rat Hunt, a storytelling contest where each person adds a sentence to an absurd tale about a vermin uprising. The winner gets to sit closest to the fire at night. This leads to increasingly tall tales. Rats in tiny foxholes sporting tunics, led by a general named Cheddar, and eventually to everyone laughing so hard they nearly fall into the embers. Your eldest daughter crafts paper dolls from birch bark, dressing them in tiny wool capes sewn with pine needle thread. She stages puppet shows on the hearth, retelling settler legends with exaggerated accents. Her youngest choreographs dances to imitate the wind's howling, complete with rattling chains of tin lids for sound effects. You watch, heart warmed, realizing that absurdity is an ember of hope. Evening brings the toughest trial yet. Wolf calls. The pack arrives each night, silent paw prints circling the cabin, nostrils flaring in the snow's quiet. Their howls pierce the darkness, a chorus that rattles your bones. You dare not sleep. If they break your flimsy door, they'll feast on more than squirrels. So you adopt the midnight watch, baton relay. Each person, man or woman, stands guard for an hour, brandishing a spear or poker, eyes straining into the black. At your shift, you step outside into a cloud of breath and moonlight. The wolves stand just beyond the lantern glow, shadows in fur, eyes glinting with curiosity. You hurl a rock, the pack vanishes in a cloud of fur, only to reappear minutes later, testing your resolve. You growl back, an embarrassingly high-pitched imitation, and retreat inside. You slam the door and press your back against it, promising the wolves they'll get no more theatrics tonight. In the morning, you inspect the perimeter, shallow paw prints but no broken boards, your barrier held. You circle each fence post, reinforcing gaps with spare boards and hay bales. The hen house gains a second door. The barn's lower vents are blocked. You even fashion a wolf bell. A patched tin cup hung on the latch, Hoping its jangling warns you of midnight visitors. By the week's end, winter's grip loosens. The days lengthen, snow melts into slushy promise. You stand at the cabin door, looking out on a world transformed. Icicles drip like crystal tears. The forest exhales moisture-laden air, and beyond the churned dirt path you see footprints, not yours alone. Neighbors emerge, tools swinging, ready to tackle spring chores. You step into the thaw, boots sinking into mud. You place hand on your still-aching chest and whisper gratitude for every trial endured. The cough-soothing herbs, mostly, the ramp-induced reprieve from scurvy, the absurd rat uprisings, and the wolf-warding tin bell that clatters merrily in the breeze. You realize that hardship forged resilience, your family's story etched in sweat and laughter. As you walk toward the barn, you spot the hen from part 2 hobbling out of her splint, wing heeled, feathers fluffed in victory. She clucks as if greeting you, and you laugh, a sound sweeter than any songbird. The goats bleat in agreement. You return to the cabin, shoulders squared against mild drafts, and jot a final note on your bark scrap. Winter 1743. Defeated, not defeated. You tuck it into your Bible beside the ramp relic, ready to share the tale at spring gatherings over mugs of real coffee and around blazing bonfires that mock the long white nights. Tomorrow, you will plant peas, mend fences, and tell the children about how winter nearly broke you, but didn't. And that, dear viewer, is how frontier settlers survived and outwitted brutal winters in early America. You awaken to a dawn that feels almost indecently warm, the sun's rays prying open your shutters like unwelcome gossip. Spring's glow floods the cabin, and you realize 2 things. Your firewood pile has shrunk to splinters, and you haven't seen a mouse in 3 nights. Both are cause for celebration, though only one you dare admit aloud. Today is part 4, the grand finale of winter survival. We'll tackle thaw season trials, mud hell, floods, bugs awakening from their microscopic bunker, and the existential dread of reorienting to a world that no longer demands mittens at all times. Buckle up your britches, summer is coming, but not without one last gauntlet. Morning, Choriapalooza. Your morning begins with the cacophonous crash of melting icicles off the eaves, death by frozen dagger, but without the dignity. You fling open the door, half expecting to dodge a falling spear of ice, but instead you see puddles everywhere, turning the yard into a swamp-themed obstacle course. Great. You slide into muck up to your ankles, prying your boot free with a stick as though excavating dinosaur remains. Naked-footed chickens dart through the muck like tiny schnauzers on speed. The poor things haven't known grass since last October. You scoop handfuls of straw, still clinging to last winter's straw pile, and fashion makeshift boardwalks, damp, wobbly, and barely serviceable. You cheer your engineering feat until the boards creak ominously and your daughters slide off into the muck, squealing with equal parts delight and trauma. By mid-morning, you've rerouted runoff from thawed snow away from the cabin foundation, using an overturned barrel, some spare shingles, and a sermon of sailors' knots you picked up from Old Man Haskins. The makeshift gutter spills water into a muddy trench that leads to the pond, preserving the cabin's floorboards and your sanity. Joe looks on, whistling an upbeat tune. You note to self that his obliviousness is sometimes the best kind of blessing. Beating the bug blitz. As the temperature crosses the comfortable human threshold, insects emerge in biblical proportions. You notice them first around the loft hatch, tiny midges swirling like a living storm. By afternoon, the barn is a riot of flies, gnats, and the occasional bumblebee looking for a hog roast. You hunker into battle mode. Your daughters sew swatches of mosquito netting into every open window frame while you fashion a bug lance, long stick tipped with resinous pitch, to torch nests. It works surprisingly well, until you realize you've unleashed a cloud of angry wasps that nearly dethrone you from your ladder. You tumble down, netting and lance clutched in one hand, and land in a pile of empty feed sacks. The wasps disperse, probably writing limericks about idiot settlers, and you emerge unscathed but covered head to toe in flour dust from the sacks. Inside, you prepare bug traps, a quart jar half filled with cider vinegar, a drop of dish soap, liberated from the town store, and a bit of leftover molasses. You line them along doorways. You'll check them tomorrow for proof of concept. In the meantime, you retreat indoors, proud of humanity's triumph over six-legged tyranny. Flooded fields and early planting. With the ground thawed to a mushy carpet, it's time to plant. You stride into the plot you tilled last fall, only to find it submerged under knee-high water. The creek, no longer content to mind its own business, has burst its banks. Your meticulously raked seed beds are now underwater slides for salamanders and waterlogged roots. Undeterred, or simply too exhausted to care, you march to the banks and start constructing a diversion dam out of stones, logs, and faith. The water roars through gaps, flooding new low points, and you curse the engineering feats of the Romans for being impossible to replicate in frozen limbs and wool breeches. Finally, on the third attempt, the creek concedes to your makeshift levee, rerouting flows into a spillway that bypasses your plot. You step back, dripping with mud and pride. It's enough to sow peas, turnips, and that last precious patch of spinach you managed to overwinter under straw. You plant by hand, seed after slippery seed, praying the soil warms before the next frost. Joe's off yanking weeds from the neighbor's neglected acre, his version of payback for your leaf-destroying bug lancing, leaving you to embed seeds in rows that look promisingly straight, until you trip and stomp half of them back into the earth. Repairs, rebuilds, and new tricks. Your winter fortifications are due for disassembly. Shutters, chimney flue, straw insulation, and that precarious, leaning tower of Pisa, tin chimney. You enlist the family. Daughters water ski across the barn roof with buckets of snowmelt to flood test your new shingles. Joe wrestles the metal pail out of the loft and curses his own craftsmanship for every dent. Once the clutter of winter is cleared, you inspect every tool. Axes dulled by frozen wood, hoes encrusted with muck, scythes rusting in corners. You dedicate an afternoon to sharpening, oiling, and retying loose handles. It's a satisfying, meditative labor, until you realize you've left the grindstone soaking in the creek, and it's now a moss-encrusted monolith that requires an unplanned half-day to restore. By evening, the workshop gleams with well-tuned implements. You prep the seed drill, a crude hand-pushed device you cobbled together, for tomorrow's sowing of corn. The girls test it on spare oats, giggling as the drill sputters like a sad donkey. You pat it affectionately and whisper, "We'll get there." Community and feast of thaw. No settler is an island, especially not one knee-deep in mud and cow pies. Word spreads that your neighbor misses. Abernathy has a bumper crop of rhubarb ready for harvest. You barter a dozen of your sharpened hoes and a volunteer shift clearing her back pasture in exchange for a bushel of rhubarb. She hands over the stalks with a triumphant grin. This is how spring begins. Back at your homestead, you and the girls wash the stalks in ice-cold water, frozen taste if nothing else, and slice them into thick ribbons. You simmer them with sugar from your winter stores, enough to conserve and enough to make pie tonight. The cats and chickens convene, hoping for scraps. You chase them off with a wooden spoon, because nobody in this vaccination-free wilderness deserves a diabetic crisis. That evening, you host the first communal feast of thaw, rhubarb pie with a side of early planting stew. Neighbors bring fresh eggs, maple syrup, and homemade cheese. Laughter fills the yard as children chase each other with bits of straw, and elders swap tales of the great blizzard and the year the spring fled. You raise your mug of pea broth, salted just enough to remind you of the winter's salt-glazed roads, and salute the table. To surviving the unimaginable and proving winter wrong, long-term lessons in duct tape. I mean ingenuity as the feast winds. Down, you take stock. The cabin still stands, the barn limps but carries hay, the livestock are fed, and your family hasn't quite abandoned you. You jot final notes in your scratched leather journal. Never trust a window latch that isn't at least 3 pounds of iron. Ration your preserved greens, but stock extra citrus zest from town. Mosquito netting should double as door and window screens year-round. Invest in a better grindstone or learn to live with micro moss. Rhubarb pie cures springtime blues. Stockpile the stalks. These aren't merely bullet points. They're the scars and trophies of another frontier winter conquered. Epilogue. The year ahead. As dusk settles on this final part of our saga, you lean against the cabin's threshold and breathe in the heady scent of thawing earth, moss, manure, and nascent life. You know well that summer brings its own trials, drought, heat waves, crop blight, locusts, of legend at least, but for now you savor the moment. You feel the rhythm of the seasons in your bones, no longer cursing winter's gloom, but grateful for the resilience it forged. Tomorrow, you will teach your children to plant corn, to mend fences, and to harvest herbs before frost returns in autumn. You'll share tales of blizzard nights and bug wars at every harvest festival. And when next winter's first frost glitters on the window pane, you'll smile, a knowing, battle-hardened smile, and murmur, "Been there, done that, got the icicle scar." So here's to frontier settlers. May their flintlights spark our modern fires, their straw-insulated cabins inspire our coziest homes, and their bloody-knuckled perseverance remind us that no matter how brutal the cold, humanity's warmth endures. And thus concludes How Frontier Settlers Survived Brutal Winters in Early America, Part 4. May your wool blankets be thick, your hearthstones steadfast, and your rhubarb pie ever sweet.